Hour 6:14 a.m. Eastern Time, U.S. Southern Command Headquarters, Miami. A single alert changes everything. Venezuelan coastal defense systems have gone active. Russian-made Bastion P missile batteries are now tracking U.S. naval movements in the Caribbean. The room goes silent. 48 hours until USS George Washington enters the disputed zone. Every decision from this moment shapes the Western Hemisphere's future. This is Global Conflict Room, where regional crises become global flashpoints. The Venezuelan government just declared a 200-mile exclusion zone. International law says 12 miles. Caracas claims extended territorial waters. Moscow backs the claim. Beijing calls it sovereignty protection. 3 carrier-capable nations now have interests in a sea corridor the U.S. has controlled since 1823. Command pulls up satellite imagery. 4 Bastion P launchers positioned along the coast. Each system carries 2 supersonic anti-ship missiles. Range 300 kilometers. Speed Mach 2.5. Target anything above 500 tons. The USS George Washington displacement 100,000 tons. A single hit wouldn't sink her, but it would kill sailors and trigger Article 5 considerations across NATO. The crisis clock starts now, T-minus 48 hours. What should command do first? A. Launch preemptive strike on missile batteries. B. Reroute carrier group through international waters. C. Initiate emergency diplomatic channel through OAS. The decision matrix fills 3 screens. Option A. Surgical strike eliminates the threat in 90 seconds. Risk: Russian military advisors confirmed at battery sites. Satellite thermal shows 23 personnel. Strike means potential Russian casualties. Moscow's response doctrine is clear. Any attack on Russian military personnel triggers immediate retaliation. The location becomes irrelevant. Option B, rerouting adds 72 hours to deployment. The carrier group loses strategic positioning. Cuba immediately closes airspace to U.S. reconnaissance flights. Nicaragua offers port access to Russian naval vessels. The delay signals weakness. Regional allies question U.S. commitment. Colombia's defense minister is already on secure line, asking for clarification. Option C, diplomatic outreach through Organization of American States. Venezuela hasn't recognized OAS authority since 2019. Brazil calls for regional de-escalation but offers no mechanism. Mexico stays neutral. Chile suggests UN mediation, which adds weeks to any resolution. Meanwhile, the carrier group maintains course at 20 knots, closing distance every hour. Command weighs each scenario with brutal precision, understanding that hesitation is itself a decision, with consequences that echo across alliance structures and deterrence credibility built over decades. 6:47 a.m. Intelligence update changes the calculation. Chinese Type 052D destroyer Kunming detected 400 miles east of the exclusion zone. Official designation: Freedom of Navigation exercise. Actual position: perfect intercept geometry if the carrier group reroutes south. The chessboard just expanded. 3 major powers now have assets converging on a sea corridor most Americans couldn't locate on a map. Yet this corridor matters. Undersea fiber optic cables, commercial shipping lanes, offshore oil platforms, and the principle that U.S. Navy vessels transit international waters without permission from regional powers backed by strategic competitors. The principle might sound abstract until you consider what happens when it breaks. 07:15 a.m. Cuba makes its move. Havana announces airspace closure for military aircraft within 200 miles of Cuban territory. The timing isn't coincidental. U.S. reconnaissance flights from Key West now need diplomatic clearance or face interception. Russian Su-30 fighters stationed in Cuba since last year are already airborne. The surveillance gap opens immediately. Satellite coverage continues, but real-time aircraft monitoring goes dark for 6 hours until the next pass. In 6 hours, mobile missile batteries can relocate. In 6 hours, submarines can reposition. In 6 hours, the tactical picture degrades from clear to uncertain. Command doctrine says uncertainty favors the defender. But who's defending what? What happens next determines the next decade. Venezuela positions this as sovereignty protection. The US frames it as freedom of navigation. Russia calls it multipolarity in action. China describes it as global South asserting rights against hegemon. Every power uses language that makes their position sound reasonable. Yet language doesn't matter when missiles lock onto targeting radar. Actions matter, decisions matter. The next 41 hours will prove which framework prevails. 7:52 a.m. The first diplomatic response arrives. Colombia activates bilateral defense cooperation agreement with United States. 2 air bases in northern Colombia now available for U.S. air operations. This changes strike calculus significantly. F-35s from Colombia can reach Venezuelan coastal batteries in 11 minutes. Response time matters in any preemptive scenario, but it also escalates regional dynamics. Venezuela immediately recalls its ambassador from Bogotá. Caracas accuses Colombia of hosting aggression. Leftist groups across Latin America mobilize protests. Brazil's president calls for calm while quietly repositioning Amazon Brigade closer to Venezuelan border. The crisis spreads like pressure waves from an explosion. Each nation forced to choose position or face accusations of complicity from one side or abandonment from the other. 8:30 a.m. Russian Ministry of Defense issues statement. Moscow confirms military advisors present at Venezuelan defense installations. Statement emphasizes advisory role only. But it includes one critical line. Russian Federation will protect its personnel under any circumstances using all available means. The phrasing is deliberate. All available means includes nuclear options under Russian doctrine, though nobody expects that level of escalation from a Caribbean missile battery dispute. Yet the language establishes Moscow's red line. Strike the batteries, risk hitting Russian personnel, trigger bilateral crisis with nuclear-armed power. The calculation just became exponentially more complex. Command runs simulations. Best case scenario for preemptive strike. Batteries destroyed, 0 Russian casualties. Venezuela protests, but takes no military action. Crisis contained. Worst case, Russian advisor killed. Moscow retaliates against U.S. assets in Syria or Ukraine. NATO Article 4 consultations begin. Multiple theaters activate simultaneously. Middle scenarios involve everything between wounded Russians, limited retaliation, diplomatic crisis, sanctions, cyber attacks, proxy conflicts. The simulation models run through 96 variations. Only 12 end without significant escalation, necessary deterrence, or dangerous escalation. The question defines modern great power competition. Deterrence theory says showing weakness invites aggression. If the carrier group reroutes, every regional power learns that missile threat plus great power backing equals U.S. concession. If the U.S. strikes preemptively, every nation with Russian or Chinese military partnerships learns their sovereignty means potential attack. Both lessons reshape global order. Both create precedents. Both paths lead somewhere different than today. Global Conflict Room analyzes these pressure points, where military doctrine meets geopolitical reality and command decisions ripple across continents. 09:43 a.m. The carrier group reports contact. Venezuelan patrol boats approaching at high speed. 6 vessels, Niigata class. Each carries anti-ship missiles. Range, 35 kilometers. They stop at international water boundary. Message clear, we're watching. U.S. destroyers maintain defensive posture. Rules of engagement prohibit firing unless fired upon. But patrol boat movements complicate any rerouting option. They're mapping U.S. response patterns. Every course change gets recorded. Every communication gets intercepted. Intelligence gathering happens in both directions. This kind of close encounter increases accident risk exponentially. 37 times in naval history, great power conflicts start from miscalculation during close encounters. Someone misreads intent. A junior officer fires without authorization. A radar malfunction triggers automatic response. The proximity itself becomes dangerous. 10:21 a.m. Pentagon convenes National Security Council meeting. All options on the table. State Department pushes diplomatic track through back channels. Defense Department leans toward maintaining carrier course with heightened alert status. CIA reports increased Russian submarine activity near U.S. East Coast. NSA detects unusual encrypted traffic between Caracas, Moscow, and Beijing. Signals intelligence suggests coordination, but specifics remain unclear. The intelligence picture shows pieces of a larger puzzle without revealing final image. Does Russia want confrontation or merely wants to demonstrate global reach? Does China seek crisis or opportunity to test U.S. response patterns? Does Venezuela control its own decisions, or has it become platform for proxy competition? These questions matter because answers determine appropriate response level. 11:15 a.m. Brazil's president calls White House. Conversation lasts 14 minutes. Brazil offers mediation, proposes temporary exclusion zone for all military vessels pending diplomatic resolution. The proposal sounds reasonable until you examine details. Temporary means 90 days. All vessels includes U.S. Navy. Resolution requires Venezuelan agreement on terms. The proposal effectively grants Venezuela exactly what it demanded through Brazilian diplomatic cover. Regional politics at work. Brazil positions itself as mediator while advancing multipolar agenda. The U.S. faces choice: accept Brazilian framework and appear to concede, or reject mediation and appear unreasonable. Either way, Brazil wins regional influence. 12:03 p.m. Commercial shipping companies start rerouting. Insurance rates for Caribbean transit spike 18%. Global markets notice. Oil futures rise on supply chain concerns. Dow drops 120 points in first hour of trading. Economic pressure builds independent of military decisions. This is modern warfare reality. Conflicts affect markets before shots are fired. Financial systems price in risk faster than militaries mobilize. 6 hours into crisis, it's already costing billions in market capitalization. These costs create their own pressure for resolution, but resolution on whose terms matters immensely for long-term strategic positioning. Which system activates first in a missile alert? A. Coastal radar array. B. Satellite infrared detection. C. Command authentication network. The technical answer is B. Satellites detect launch first through infrared signature, but the operational answer is more complex. Detection means nothing without authenticated command structure to authorize response. Modern military operations depend on layered systems, where each component verifies others. Single-point failure becomes nearly impossible. That same redundancy slows decision cycles. Time from detection to authorization averages 4 minutes in U.S. systems. Russian systems average 6 minutes. Venezuelan systems using Russian equipment likely similar. 4-minute window means any preemptive strike must achieve complete destruction before Venezuelan crews can launch. Success might be worse than no action. Damaged but functional batteries could fire erratically, hitting civilian vessels or missing targets and creating debris fields. Precision matters absolutely. 14:37 p.m. Intelligence update. Russian submarine detected near Puerto Rico. Improved Kilo-class diesel-electric boat running quiet. Detection came from underwater listening arrays, confirmed by P-8 Poseidon patrol. Submarine positioning adds new dimension. Silent boats can interdict supply lines, monitor communications, or simply demonstrate presence. This particular boat carries caliber cruise missiles with range exceeding 2,000 kilometers. From current position, it can strike targets across Caribbean and southern United States. Game theory suggests the submarine is signal, not threat. Moscow demonstrates capability without attacking. The message, escalation has costs we can impose. If you follow global conflict analysis, type GCR, because understanding these dynamics matters beyond this single crisis. Every regional flashpoint in coming years will feature similar patterns. Local disputes amplified by great power competition, military posturing blending with diplomatic maneuvering, economic pressure reinforcing security concerns. The Venezuelan trigger isn't unique. It's template for future crises in South China Sea, Arctic waters, and Middle East choke points. Learning to read these situations, understanding decision pressures faced by commanders, recognizing escalation pathways before they activate. This knowledge becomes essential as geopolitical competition intensifies across every domain, from undersea cables to satellite orbits. 16:45 p.m. T-minus 38 hours until carrier group reaches exclusion zone. Decision point approaching. National Command Authority weighs 3 refined options. First, continue course with elevated alert status. Dare Venezuela to fire first. Prepare immediate overwhelming response if they do. This maintains freedom of navigation principle, but risks casualties and escalation. Second, announce temporary rerouting for diplomatic purposes. Work back channels for face-saving solution. Resume normal transit patterns after 90-day cooling period. This avoids immediate crisis, but establishes precedent that missile threats work. Third, limited strike on radar installations only. Disable targeting capability without destroying launchers. Reduce Russian casualty risk while degrading Venezuelan threat. This splits the difference but might satisfy neither deterrence nor de-escalation goals. Wargame simulations run all 3 options through 50 iterations each. Results are mixed. Option 1 succeeds in 72% of scenarios, but the 28% failures include catastrophic outcomes. Option 2 succeeds in 41% of cases, and failures generally involve emboldened future challenges. Option 3 succeeds in 59% of iterations, but failure modes include partial escalation that satisfies nobody and creates unstable equilibrium. Percentages guide decisions but cannot make them. Command responsibility means choosing despite uncertainty, accepting consequences, living with outcomes that ripple across years. 19:33 p.m. Venezuelan president addresses nation. Speech broadcast on state television and Russian RT network. Content mixes revolutionary rhetoric with sovereignty claims. Key passage: territorial waters extend to natural resource boundaries. Under international law principles, Venezuela recognizes. Translation: we claim what we want, regardless of treaties we signed. The speech includes no off-ramp, no diplomatic opening, no compromise language. Caracas has locked itself into position where backing down means domestic political disaster. This pattern appears frequently in crisis escalation. Leaders make public commitments that eliminate their own flexibility. Domestic politics trump international stability. The commander-in-chief, who appears weak at home, cannot compromise abroad. Venezuela's president just removed his own escape routes while simultaneously reducing U.S. options for face-saving solutions. 21:47 p.m. Night operations begin. Satellite surveillance increases. Infrared shows Venezuelan military units repositioning. 3 battalions moving toward Colombian border. Defensive posture or offensive preparation. Ambiguous movement creates intelligence dilemma. U.S. shares imagery with Colombia. Bogotá places forces on alert. Brazil detects the movements and increases Amazon brigade readiness. Paraguay quietly mobilizes reserves. The crisis spreads mechanically. Each nation responds to neighbors' movements, regardless of intent. Security dilemma activates. Actions taken for defense appear offensive to others, triggering defensive responses that appear offensive, creating spiral where everyone feels threatened and nobody feels secure. This dynamic has started wars throughout history, despite nobody actually wanting conflict. Systemic pressures overwhelm individual intentions. Day 1 of Venezuelan crisis ends without shots fired. Yet every hour increased pressure, reduced flexibility, raised stakes. Command decisions tomorrow face narrower options and higher consequences than today. This is how crises escalate, not through sudden explosions but through accumulating commitments, shrinking maneuver space and mounting pressure to act decisively before options disappear entirely. Global Conflict Room examines these dynamics because understanding crisis mechanics matters for preventing catastrophic outcomes. Military scenarios aren't inevitable. They're constructed through chains of decisions where different choices create different futures. But those choices must happen in real time, under pressure, with incomplete information. Second-guessing from comfortable distance misses the essential pressure of command. Decide now with what you know, accept responsibility for what follows. T-minus 34 hours. The room stays active. Analysts rotate shifts. Satellite passes continue. Diplomatic channels hum with encrypted traffic. Carrier group maintains course at 20 knots. Venezuelan missile batteries remain active. Russian submarine holds position. Chinese destroyer monitors from distance. Commercial shipping reroutes. Markets price in risk. Every system responds to every other system in complex web, where predicting outcomes becomes nearly impossible beyond 2 or 3 moves ahead. Was escalation avoidable? Could different choices in first hours have prevented crisis deepening? Should regional powers have intervened earlier? These questions matter for learning, but they don't change what commanders face now. Decide under pressure, act despite uncertainty, hope for best while preparing for worst. What decision would you make in that room? Subscribe to Global Conflict Room, inside the room where history changes, where every crisis unfolds decision by decision, where command pressure shapes outcomes, where global security hangs on choices made in compressed timeframes by people carrying impossible responsibility.